In this special launch episode of the Toolbox, I'm celebrating the release of my new course, GitHub Code Challenges. So I'll talk about my favorite GitHub products and the Toolbox shorts. Then I'll give you some of my favorite Git and GitHub tips. Then I'll show you how to watch one of my latest courses for free. So let's get started. All right. How's it going? Good to see you guys. I see some people already on the chat. Let me know if there's any problems. Sometimes with these things, you never know what your audio sounds like. I tested it before, but you never know. So hope everybody's doing great. Today I have a special episode. Normally, this is the Toolbox, which is just me sharing a bunch of tools that I'm excited with. But this is a special episode because I just released a brand new course. And I'll be sharing with you a little bit about the course later on and showing you one video from the course so you can get a taste of it. I'm also going to make the video available to everyone for free. Just make sure you follow me at linkedin.com/in/planet of the web, and you'll be able to get the code for free for 24 hours. So as usually what I do in the Toolbox is start off by giving you a section called Toolbox Shorts. And so what I was going to do this week is give you some of the GitHub tools that they've been sort of working on. I've noticed that ever since Microsoft purchased them, they've developed a ton of amazingly cool stuff, and they seem to be at an even like super fast clip. So let's go ahead and talk about some of those. Let's go ahead and switch over my view. Now, the first tool, and you probably know a lot about this, is GitHub CodeSpaces. Now, I think this tool is really going to change the way that developers work. It's Visual Studio Code in your browser, and it's deeply integrated into GitHub. So everything that you can do with Visual Studio Code, you can do with this CodeSpaces. Now, recently, GitHub announced a quick way to jump directly into CodeSpaces. So you can go into any GitHub repo and directly jump into CodeSpaces by just hitting the period. So let me show you how that works. Let's open up a repo. So this is from a Tailwind course that I'm working on right now. So here I am on this repository. If I want to convert this into a Visual Studio Code codespace, all I have to do is just hit the period key. Now that will fire up CodeSpaces and load that repo directly into it. So you can do that from any repo whatsoever. And then, so if I wanted to say that I'm away and I don't have my machine next to me, I can very quickly just go to a repo if I notice perhaps some sort of issue. and hit the period key. And as long as I'm logged into GitHub, directly go and get a Visual Studio Code editor that does the same thing as anything that I would be using in my local machine. And it's super fast. It starts up pretty quickly. That's something that they have worked on. If you were to read the blog on how they did this, they actually talked about how they put the entire GitHub code base itself on GitHub, and they were able to reduce the load time for those things from something like, I think it was 45 minutes to get the code base to start. So by doing a lot of caching, they were able to reduce that to just under 10 seconds. You can see that it started a lot quicker. And once you start it up, if you've already cached it, it usually starts up a little bit quicker. So you can see that it looks exactly like Visual Studio Code, and anything that you can do in Visual Studio Code, you can do with this. Now, last week, I also demoed an additional tool that does something pretty interesting with this. And the tool is called CodeSwing. It's actually by the developer who is the product manager for GitHub CodeSpaces. And what it does is it allows you to jump into essentially like a CodePen version of a GitHub repo. So if I'm going to open this up. All right, so another interesting thing is that if you go to any repo and you want to send somebody a link that takes them directly into a code space, all you have to do is, instead of github.com, you switch the URL over to github.dev. So all you have to do is to switch that over to github.dev. I don't know if you can see github.dev, but it looks like, I don't know if you saw it there, but you change the URL, and then you can copy that link, or if you just copy the link to your repo and you replace that TLD from .com to .dev, it'll send the link that jumps somebody directly into CodeSpaces. So if I go to this URL and I showed this in the last toolbox, then this is actually using an extension called CodeSwing that opens a repo up, or lets you open a repo up as essentially what would be a code pen. So you get the 3 different tabs down here for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then you'll get a live preview of the code. So this kind of lets you replace something like CodePen. The advantage here is that you can use the full power. It's running a little bit slow on my machine, but it actually normally opens up a little bit fast. So this will actually let you just take a project and then create a code swing that it's like a code pen, but still giving you all the power of something like GitHub. So another thing that this will do is that this is just a regular project. So if you have build tools, they can actually work in this mode, and you can do diffs of different branches. Everything that you can do in GitHub is now available in sort of the CodeSpace style, which I think it's pretty cool. It's going to open up a lot of sort of things for me in the way that I teach coding. So hopefully you can use something like that as well. Super excited about it. The other thing that they have recently launched is something called GitHub Copilot. So Copilot is essentially a sort of the next generation of autocomplete. This is an AI tool that's really cool because it can write entire functions for you in a lot of different programming languages. And it does that based on the context of your code. So it notices what language you're using. It notices everything on the current page that you're coding in, and it will just suggest some additional code in there for you. So if I can demo this. So for example, it can do really simple things, like say I start typing the quick brown fox, and notice that it's auto-completing that line for me. So all I have to do is hit the tab key. But if I want to actually work with code, then I can just create a file here called script.js. It noticed that this is a JavaScript file. And then in here, I can just start typing in a function. So let's see, let's make that. Let's see. So let me try just putting in function random, and it's going to try to write that function for me. So you can type in whatever you want in here, and it will attempt to do that. Or if you give it some description here, random number or something, it'll autocomplete what you're trying to do, and then it'll allow you to jump in to Copilot which will give you a lot of different sort of versions of that code. And once you find something that you like, then you can hit the accept solution. It's not perfect, but I think that the more people use this thing, the better it'll get at writing some of this stuff for you. Let's see. And we'll just, you can hit tab to accept the code. So I'm just going to save that for right now. And that is pretty awesome. You probably have heard about it. Something you may not have heard about is the fact that GitHub is working on this project management version of their tools. And normally you're probably used to using GitHub issues, right? And with GitHub issues, you can create a Kanban board that will let you manage your project, which is pretty awesome. But this tool that they're working on, or sort of next generation of that tool, it's letting you either look at a project in the traditional Kanban board way, or now you'll be able to look at things in a table. So it actually gives you a fantastic way to, look at an overview of your project instead of using the Kanban board. Some people find this version a lot more useful. Now, this is in private beta right now. I haven't been able to access this quite yet. I would love for somebody to give me access. So GitHub, if you're watching. But this, I think, is going to be pretty cool. And it's interesting that they seem to be working on all types of interesting projects recently. So yes, the AI pair programmer. So AI pair programmer, is that a thing? Yeah, that tool is actually pretty cool. It can just really suggest a lot of things for you. So next up, the CLI. So yesterday there was an announcement. GitHub has a command line interface. So this is a terminal tool that you can use. And what it essentially lets you do is anything that you can do on GitHub, you will be able to eventually do with this CLI. So you can, one of the ways that I find it useful is I can create an issue directly from a project. Now, this particular project isn't on GitHub quite yet because it's something that I'm working on. But with this tool, I could create a GitHub issue and directly sort of push it to GitHub. Why would that be useful? Well, a lot of times, if I want to create an issue, I need to switch out from the current code base, take a look in GitHub, go to the page that has the code, and then maybe mark some lines in there, and then create my issue based on that tool. Well, with this CLI, you can actually just, while you're in the piece of code that you're working on, you can from there immediately create the issue, which is just a lot quicker. If you love the command line, the CLI is a good addition, and they're just getting started. So the new version is version 2.0. The thing that they announced that is pretty big is the ability of other people to add extensions to the CLI. So that means that developers are going to go nuts and add all kinds of interesting things that, who knows, like think about all the cool additions that have been done on top of VS Code. Like I just played with something called tab out. That is like a way of letting you tab out of like brackets and, parentheses. Simple thing, but it makes such a big difference. So I'm pretty excited about what third parties are going to be able to do with the CLI to expand it way more than even the ideas that somebody like GitHub would have. There's another small announcement that they made, and this is for GitHub for mobile. So GitHub for mobile is really for people who are managing repos. A lot of times you want to sort of manage your notifications within your mobile app if you happen to go to lunch and you need to know if maybe, I don't know, the server went down or somebody put in a major issue, added a major issue to your project. This is a great way of sort of keeping track of things while you're working, while you're away from your desk. And holy cow, I have to give it to GitHub. They make like amazing little demo websites, right? Don't these look fantastic? So this is pretty cool. You can collaborate with other people and make comments on issues and things like that. You can check things out. It's not, 100% as useful as having your full machine, but when you're away and you need to know something, it's also a good way of sort of managing quick things. They just added the ability for you to block people, because sometimes if you have a big project, you may get like a ton of somebody really bugging you about things. So they've added that ability of blocking people if you don't want to listen from them. So one non-GitHub thing that I want to show you about is a Git Lens. If you don't have this installed as a Visual Studio Code extension, you got to have this installed. This is quite possibly, although GitHub itself has a lot of functionality, I'm sorry, although Visual Studio Code has a lot of Git functionality, for some reason, it's not quite as good as what you have available for you in this tool. So I use it primarily to compare branches together, but you can see there's a whole bunch of features that you can do here. So you can go through this site. One of the other things that it does, if I show you my site, you will be able to see little notes about, for example, right here, about when I made a specific commit. It's really amazing. So as you're going through your code, you can kind of get an idea of when you did things and who did them if you're working on a project with multiple people who did them. Now, one feature that Git gives you, or Visual Studio Code just gives you by default, is the ability to compare or to different files. So I use this all the time to compare what I've been added since my last commit. But one thing it doesn't do is allow you to compare things with other commits. And this is one way that I use Git Lens a ton. So if you command, I forget what the command is. So yeah, if you hold down the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac, then you can actually choose a branch to diff with. So you can say, I want to compare this with maybe this other branch and take a look at the difference from the current thing that you're working with perhaps a different branch. And as you guys probably know, I use GitHub heavily with all of my courses. And one thing that I need to do is compare perhaps like how this branch looks with a finished version of my branch or just another branch. So this is killer. I often, when you see me working on courses, I actually have to turn it off because I feel that if I had it on, it would show you so many cool things that you could do with it that it wouldn't be fair for somebody who's just getting started. So I always turn it off and then always just remember to turn it back on. Probably one of my favorite extensions. All right, so I think I showed you that. Yeah, I already showed you Code Swing, so that is pretty cool. Let's take a look at what I have else on my. Let's see if there's any cool commands. I don't know what this means. GHCLI ***. Yeah, some people have been using that for over a year now. That's great. Yeah, and there's a lot of cool. I'm pretty impressed with the work that GitHub has been doing lately. And they just seem to be at an extremely fast clip developing things. So let's talk about some Git-specific GitHub tips or Git tips that I use all the time. So the first is going to be sort of a couple of changes to Git itself that you may not be aware of, but you're going to be seeing these like more and more in the future. So first off, let's go ahead and turn off this Git Lens here, this comparison, and go back to this index file. Let's just save that. So first off is a couple of command changes that have happened in Git. So the thing is that in the past, we use the git checkout command for a lot of different things. So you, for example, if you wanted to, let's take a look at the git status. So if you have a bunch of things that in untracked and staged, then you might do something like this. And I use this all the time whenever I want to reset to the sort of last commit. I would use a git checkout period. Well, technically that is now changed, or it has been changed, or it's in beta to be changed, that instead of checkout for this, you should be using git restore. Same thing, it does the exact same thing. It's just that since checkout was doing so many things, they've actually added a couple of commands. You can see that it'll do the same thing. I probably didn't want to restore that, but it left the script file here, but it essentially sort of set all my changes to the way that they were in the last commit. So git restore does the same thing. Another one that got changed that you probably want to know about, just because you'll see people using it and you're like, oh, what the heck is that? Is the git switch command. So it works exactly like git checkout. So if you wanted to create a new branch, you used to be able to do git. I mean, you still actually can use these commands. You would do git checkout -b, and then you would say new branch. The super cool correct you command is git switch and then it's -C new branch. So just a couple of things for you to be aware of that have changed. I think this changed in version 2.2. So if you try it out on your version of Git, maybe you haven't updated to the latest version, but I have a feeling that you'll be seeing that a lot. It does seem that it cleans things up quite a bit. So that's cool. So another thing that you should, well, here's maybe some of my tips. So I usually have a git ignore file in my projects so that some things don't get pushed over to my repo. So git ignore, right? And this file, also there's already one in here somewhere. Okay, there it is. So the git ignore will just ignore certain things that don't need to be pushed over to GitHub, like the node modules, and Macs have these annoying like DS store files. And yeah, thank you. I need to hide that comment overlay. Yeah, it's a lot to like. I'm doing live coding, have like I have 3-4 different screens here. So thanks for letting me know if something goes funky. All right, so one thing that I like to do in Git ignore is to add myself a couple of extra little sort of things. So I like to add myself a notes folder and maybe include a notes folder in my project for any notes that I want to take myself on the project, but I don't want pushed into GitHub because they're just personal notes, to-dos. Another thing that you can add here is sometimes I add myself essentially a to-do extension. So I'll do something like this, to-do.md, and that lets me add a -to-do file anywhere in any one of my subfolders, and any of those files are not going to be pushed into GitHub. So that's one of the tips that I use sometimes on projects, especially if I know that I'm going to be working on things quite a bit. There's also a way to actually create, if you are using a lot of git ignore files on your projects, you can actually use git config and then do a global and then core.excludes file, and then put in a link to a global exclude file. So you might use like a git ignore, right? Something like this. So this would be a git ignore file in your home directory. And what this will do is apply that same git ignore file to all the projects that you create on this local machine, which can be useful if you're always excluding like the same things and you don't want to always be creating a git ignore file. I mean, the git ignore file is useful, but perhaps some of these additions that you might do yourself, like you want to have nodes and to-dos or other custom things in your git ignore, then it's a good idea maybe to create a special excludes file that is at your home. So I like that tip quite a bit. Let's see. Okay, hold on. I'm seeing a blurred screen. I think it might be your connection. I feel like I'm not doing anything weird, so hopefully it'll clear up. All right, let's see. Copying a branch. So I showed you the git switch command. Now, one command that I use a lot is the git clean command. I don't know if you've used this before. So git clean. Yeah, hope it's not anything on my side. I'm hearing some stuff about connection issues. I don't really see anything weird on my machine, so hopefully it is not a problem. I'm not seeing any kind of slowdowns from StreamYard, so I apologize. There's always something, right? All right, so another tip that I use is the git clean command. I don't know if you've ever used it. So if you're working on a project, you notice that I created this script.js file. If I do a git status, then it will actually tell me that I have some untracked files in my project. And you know that if I do the git checkout or the git restore command period, so we'll do it the old school git checkout period, it'll update things, but it won't do anything with this script.js file because it's untracked. So sometimes you may have a bunch of untracked files that you want to get cleaned up. And so in that case, you can use the git clean command. Now, you don't want to use this with, you don't want to use this without sort of seed what the effects would be. So you can run the git clean -n command, and it'll actually tell you what it's going to remove. So this is going to, by default, try to remove untracked files. You can, if you have some directories that are empty, you can use a clean minus D for directories. And then it would just, right now, I don't have any empty directories, but it would try to remove empty directories. And then when you're sure, like once you've done your tests and you want to make sure that you are cleaning everything else, you can add the force option. And so that actually, let me not do, I want to include, of course, the dry run. So I just want to do a git clean minus df. This will actually remove the script files. It's a quick way of getting rid of untracked files. A lot of times as I'm working on things, I'll have like a bunch of untracked files and it's sort of hard to get rid of them all. Also, for some reason, sometimes if you put things on the desktop on a Mac, it will create like all these copies of files. This is a quick way of getting rid of those that I find pretty useful myself. So hopefully some of the network things have been worked out. Let's keep on going. All right, GitHub also has a bunch of top-level domains that you can use that are pretty useful. So one of the ones that I use a lot is, let's go ahead. If you want to create a new repo, the easiest way to create one is to just go to repo.new. This, if you're logged in, this will create a quick repo at GitHub for you. It's the same thing as going to github.com/new. This is also the same thing as github.new will take you to the same place. So there are like a couple of shortcuts. If you want to create a quick gist, you can just do gist, come on, I can't type, gist.new. It'll do the same. Well, actually, it'll create a new gist super quickly. It's take you directly to gist, which is sort of like kind of maybe part of GitHub. So that is pretty cool. Also, if you want to quickly create a code space, then you could just go to github.dev. So if you go to github.dev, it'll fire up a quick code space for you with nothing in it. It'll have like a README file, I think. So another cool shortcut. All right, another thing that you can do is if you go to repos, so let's go into my repositories. And let's just take a look at one. And let's see, let's take a look at my Tailwind slides. So really from any place in a repository, one of my favorite shortcuts is if you hit the T key, then, oh, I'm so sorry that stuff is blurred. So, okay, so if you hit the T key, you'll actually get to a shortcut for the file system. So if you're in GitHub and you're trying to find a file, then you can very easily just hit the T key and then type in, maybe you're looking for the package.json, just type in a few of the characters, and then you can go up and down to whatever file you want. So if I hit return here, it'll go directly into that file. Super useful. Another thing that's cool is, of course, you know that the search can be accessed with this slash. So if I hit the slash key, it'll just take me directly to search. That's a cool shortcut to know about. Also, the question mark on any page in GitHub, if you don't know, if you don't remember what the shortcut is, you can just hit the shift question mark, and that will take you to the shortcuts. This is context sensitive, and that means that it'll look different on every page that you go to, because some pages can do some things that others can't. So you can find even, there's a bunch of Go commands that are pretty cool. So you can like go to the wiki, go to projects, go to actions. So let's try that. Like we'll hit GA, and it'll take me directly to the actions for this project. So super cool, super cool. So let's see. So that is just some of the basic shortcuts that I use all the time when I'm working with Git. Now, another thing that you might not know about is how to create a special profile for GitHub. So if I take a look at a normal repository, let's try this gentleman here. You can see that, you know, this person is fantastic. I mean, this is a normal GitHub profile, which usually has the popular repositories. You have like this green dot section, which is pretty cool. Let's take a look at somebody who's really put some effort into creating their profile. So if you go to my profile, you can see that I have a picture, I have some text here, and a few links here to some of my content. So the way that you can create a custom sort of homepage for your profile is just to create a project with the same sort of username as yourself. So if I go to github.com/planet of the web/planet of the web, which is my username, it'll take me to a document that is essentially just a README file. I can put whatever I want into this Git file, into this repo, into this README file. And notice that over here on the right, it says Planet of the Web is a special repository. Its README file will appear on your public profile. So if you're looking for a job, you can, add some things in here and then just add a ton of links to the work that you're doing. I think it's a little bit better than just like the default. So that is something that you should definitely do to sort of spice up your README file and your homepage. Let's see. So I want to get into the course that I worked on. So the course that I did is called Github Code Challenges. It has this really cool kind of intro, which I love. And I don't know if you're probably not going to be able to hear the audio, but so this course is essentially a series of challenges that I put together for people who want to learn more about GitHub. You don't really need to know how to solve the challenges, but perhaps it's something that you can try yourself. So it begins usually by me kind of giving you a challenge and then giving you a little bit of time to try it out. And then, talking about what the challenge is and then giving you some time and then showing you how I solved that challenge pretty quickly. So you can see that I have a lot of different when I was creating this course, I was trying to figure out what sort of things should I show. And I think that I ended up with anything that was sort of a frustration to me. I added it as a challenge here. And so you can see there's things like what happens if I commit a password or maybe like an API key. So there's like a challenge about that. Here's how you delete commit history. There's, I did a lot of things with bash scripting. So, one of the things that I like to do is automate GitHub or Git with bash scripting, actually Git and GitHub, because with bash scripting, you can do anything you want on a project. So I go into that and then I go into GitHub Actions and I show you how to do that. So I'm gonna let you watch one of the videos that I made for this. And let's try under brand. I'm gonna play the video. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. And this is one of the hardest, I think it's about the hardest challenge that I presented. And it's about how to use secrets in GitHub, but then how to do something with that secret. So this will show you how to create a GitHub action that pulls, queries an API, and then creates a file on your server that has the results of the query from that API. And then it shows you what you can do with something like that. So let's go ahead and play the video. When working with projects, it's really important to be able to store certain IDs, variables, and special passwords securely. Now for this challenge, I want you to store a secret in GitHub and retrieve it using GitHub Actions. I'll give you a couple of seconds to pause the video and think about how you may have solved something like this. Now to store a secret in GitHub, you'll need to go to your account. Then you'll need to find a repository that you want to add a secret to. I'm using this Parallax repository, and it's been cleaned up from the previous video. In here, click on Settings, and then look for the section called Secrets. You can see that I've already got a secret right here. To create it, I can just hit the New Repository Secret, give the secret a name. I've already called mine Google API Key, and then paste your API or your secret right here into this value. Now, you won't be able to see the value of that secret again, so you can remove it or update the secret, but you can't see what's been stored there. And this is great for when you're working with a lot of people and you want them to have access to an API with a shared key, but you don't want them to know what that key is. Now let's go into Actions, and we're going to create a new workflow right here. And we'll set this up ourselves, and we'll create a new workflow to go ahead and use that secret in a practical way. So I'm going to paste some code, and then I'll go line by line through it so you can understand it. I'm going to replace what's in here. And you can see that I've given this thing a name so that the workflow runs under this name. And then I'm asking it to go ahead and run whenever somebody pushes to the main branch. Now here we send it a series of jobs, and the job that we want to run will run on a specific machine called Ubuntu Latest. That's the Ubuntu operating system and the latest version of that. Now we can make a reference to the key that we stored. We're saying that this is going to use our Google API key that we stored in our secrets. And then we define a series of steps. Now, here we want to use at least the checkout action that Google provides for us. This will make sure that the code that I run down here is going to have access to the files in my repository. Now I can run a series of steps, and it's a good idea to give the steps a name because you can have more than one series of steps. And in here, so I'm calling this one get the fonts list, and I'm going to run a terminal command. So this run right here means that the following will execute as if I was typing them from the terminal. And it starts with a pipe character because I'm going to be including more than one line. So you'll notice that the first couple of things that I'm doing here is set up the git config file so that it has a username as well as an email. That's important because GitHub is going to be spinning up a machine for you. And the first time you create or you use GitHub in a machine, it's going to want you to configure the username and password. We're using the environment variables. So GitHub actor means the account that is running this action. And then input email will be the email from that account. And you'll need to include both. Now in here, we're using a curl command. So we're using the Google APIs and the web fonts, specifically version 1. And in here, we're running this web fonts application. We're passing along a key. Now, normally you would be pasting the key physically in here, but we can ask it to look in the secrets for the Google API key that we generated earlier. It's going to take the results of this curl statement, which is something you can type in on your terminal. It's going to retrieve that into a file that it will call fontslist.json. That's a file that will now be in this repository, but it won't exist in GitHub unless we commit it and we push it back onto GitHub. So we need to do a git add as well as a git commit. So you can see that I'm combining those statements. I'll give it a name here called updated fonts list. And then I am pushing this back into GitHub so that it will appear as a file in my repository. So let's go ahead and start this commit. We'll commit this file. So now that the workflow is created, we're going to go to Actions, and we want to go ahead and click on All Workflows, and then choose the workflow we want to run, which will be this Favorite Google Fonts. We'll click on the workflow. So you can see that it's run the workflow, and it's been successful at doing all the actions. So you can take a look at Get the Fonts list, and you can see that it created a file called fontslist.json. Now, if we go back into the code, you should be able to see that file right here. And that has a JSON file of the Google Fonts favorites. The ability to do something using actions on GitHub and having that generate a file using a secret is pretty awesome. I'm sure you're already thinking about what else you can do with this technique. All right, so hopefully you were able to watch that. If not, I've made the entire course available for free, and you can look at this URL that's appearing below as a ticker and go ahead and watch that course for free for 24 hours. So let's see, what else do I have? So next week, I'll be doing another episode of the Toolbox where I'm going to show you how to work with Tailwind's just-in-time mode. So if you took a look at what I was doing over here, I have essentially a Tailwind CSS file opened up here as an index.html. And down here is some of the code that you would normally put into something like Tailwind CSS. Now, one of the cool additions to Tailwind is that you can now essentially turn on a mode that will automatically generate, look at the HTML, or it could be view files, React, whatever you want, and then only generate the code for the classes that you're using in your CSS. That is just-in-time mode, and it's pretty amazing. Another thing that you can do is, for example, for a lot of these classes, you end up using things like this 5XL text5xl sort of command here. With just-in-time mode, you can actually put in any particular font size that you wanted to here. So instead of having to sort of think of something like Bootstrap, it has like different font size classes, or even when you use the headlines, you have like headline level 1 through 6. With Tailwinds, you can now put in any sort of number as a parameter in any of the classes. And once again, it'll build a CSS file that has only the things that you're using. So whereas with something like Bootstrap or even the regular version of Tailwind, you end up with a humongous file. With something like the Tailwind just-in-time mode, you end up with something super tiny like 4 or 5K, and it also builds super, super fast. So that's what's in store next week. And hopefully I'll take a look at the chat to see if there's any comments or questions. And I really apologize. I don't exactly know what the problem is. It could be my streaming. For some reason, when I run like so many different monitors, my machine does seem to slow down. I will be putting all the links to all the tools that I showed on my personal website, which is repo.org. So you can go there for any of the tools, and we'll see all the links, and I'll put a finished version of the show so that you can also, hopefully, maybe if you didn't get a good experience with the streaming, that will also give you, a higher resolution type of view than you've had before. Although some people are saying that it's better than earlier. So the rest of the show is really just answering any questions that you have about anything. Let me know. I'll hang around for a couple of minutes here, and I'm going to scroll down through some of the others. Yeah, I love that Git Lens. That Git Lens extension is really one of those tools that you will not want to live without once you've used it. It gets pretty hairy once you've tried doing different it's definitely. So I've been using. I've been with then in an terminal from the what happened into that's pretty sweet. I feel the usage for is not where it's going to be. I think that in the future I'll be able to do more useful things to it. Now that they have released the ability for people to create extensions, I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot much more amazing things than what we've been looking at before. So cool. So I'm planning on doing this once a week, hopefully. I guess unless I'm crazy with work, I feel like I can pull off a once a week show and kind of try to bring you some different tools. Uh, so yeah, Copilot. Yeah, GitHub Copilot. That's a good question. So yeah, Copilot is a Visual Code extension. Right now is on preview only. So you do have to request access if you go to the website. And again, just go to repo.org later on, and I'll have a link to it. You can probably just Google it. I think it's like github.com/copilot. And it is a Visual Studio Code extension that you add. So yeah, this will be copilot.github.com. And it's a Visual Studio Code extension. You know where it really ends up helping me? It actually, because English isn't my first language, a lot of times I'll be writing things. Let's see, this week. I'll just start typing in something, and it'll actually also suggest what I should be writing. And it actually really helps me with just the generic sort of writing that I do. Also, like a lot of times I'll misspell things. So the auto completion will actually not necessarily fix my mistakes, but it'll actually give me a good sentence that I can base things off. That's really because, GitHub Copilot is based on GPT-3, I think it is. It's a technology that it's a natural language artificial intelligence tool that this other company that Microsoft invested like $1 billion in modified to read open source. Essentially, it reads like a ton of open source code and it actually generates original code, but it gets trained from like all the stuff on essentially, I think definitely GitHub, maybe Stack Overflow, anything that is openly available. That's the training version of it. And it actually works with almost any language. I think anything that really has a huge code base. So something like JavaScript, it does a fantastic job. Python does a great job. And other languages, it does a really cool work. If you did not know about Tailwind, you're going to want to be here next week. I have a course on Tailwind CSS. It is version 2.0. They are on a very, very fast clip. So I did that course like maybe a few months ago, and it's already jumped like 2 versions. And in the first 2.1 version, they added this just-in-time mode, and they just updated. They made like a lot of changes to it recently. I'm building the new version of that code, so that's what I'll talk about next week. If you can be here next Wednesday at 1 p.m., you are going to. It's, oh my gosh, every once in a while you run into a tool that just changes the way that you think about doing work, and it was, the annoying part about Tailwind is the fact that you do end up writing a ton of classes. There's ways to customize that, but there's reasons not to customize that. So if you think about what you do when you create CSS, like a style sheet, right? You generate a style sheet and then you apply it to your website, and you spend a ton of time overwriting what you've done, right? So you end up writing additional styles so that in a certain instance, this headline needs to look a certain way. If it's under this and it's inside this tag, then it needs to do something else. And once you write that class, you'll end up realizing that that is affecting something else. You have to be more specific, or you may end up using like the important option, and you end up with just spaghetti CSS that is really hard to maintain because you forget what you have done. But what the browser is actually doing, so if you look at a browser, what it's doing, it's generating it's taking all of your CSS. So if I showed you in the inspect mode here on this website, let's see, how are we doing on time? Yeah, 1:47, so I have some time to play around. So if you take a look at what's happening on your browser, and you look at elements, right, you know that you have a couple of tabs here. So the tabs will actually show you 2 different things: the styles, and you can see the cascade over here, right? So you can see that this section is written with all these classes that you're working with, and the first class over here at the top is the last class that is sort of being applied. So if you've created a color earlier on, this is actually the color that is being, I have no idea what I clicked on, so I don't know where. Oh yeah, it looks like it's the headline. So after it applies all these other styles, at the very end, it's going to apply a font size. And look at all the stuff that's getting written. Like, you've got all these font sizes because the CSS itself has all these, the CSS file has all these font sizes in there. Now, what your browser is actually doing is reading all that CSS that you've written and then creating a computed version of this CSS that says, you actually, what this element really needs is the background color, the color padding, and there's actually a version of the code that is what you actually see. So the advantage of something like Tailwind or Tailwind CSS, is that you are literally coding almost like at the very end, the last thing that the browser is going to be doing. So there isn't this huge cascade, which is going to make your pages load faster. It's also very specifically telling you what it's doing at every step. Now, the disadvantage is that, of course, if you're creating 10 of these headlines, you would have to put all the classes in again for all the other headlines. So it works super well for something like if you're using a framework like Vue.js that's component based, where the component is actually going to be generating all the code for you, then you're going to be using it only once. Also, there is a way of creating custom classes. I'll probably cover that next week, or you can take a look at the course that I have done. It does like it just changes the way that you think about how you write CSS. It sounds like a horrible idea at first, but I'm telling you, it is super cool. So if you go to Tailwind CSS, you can take a look at the project itself. And again, I'll be talking about this next week. It has a lot of responsive options, so you can tell it what the code does at different sort of widths. You can see there's a really good demo there, a dynamic demo of what's happening at every different breakpoint. You can change the style on hover. It's pretty awesome. Yeah. So this is the problem that, best practices don't actually work. Like, all that cascading is just sometimes more trouble than it's worth. So hopefully you can take a look at it, see if it's the right thing for you, and we'll talk about it next week. So I don't really see anything new. So thanks for coming. Hopefully I'll get to see you again next Wednesday, and I'll tell you if I think that Tailwind CSS is a bootstrap killer, and I'll show you how to do some of the cool new things in this new JIT version of Tailwind CSS. Talk to you next week.